The carriage wheels ground against frozen earth, each revolution echoing through the mountain pass like the ticking of a death clock. Elara Vale sat motionless in the darkness, her fingers resting on the silver blade hidden beneath her cloak. 15 years of training had taught her to breathe slowly, to keep her heartbeat steady, to become a shadow among shadows. Tonight, that training would finally serve its purpose. Outside, the blizzard screamed its fury against the carriage walls. Inside, Elara memorized the layout sketched in her mind. Thornveil Keep. 12 guards visible at the main gate, 4 patrol routes circling the perimeter, iron gates reinforced, but with hinges that showed age and weakness. The intelligence her handlers had provided was thorough. 3 weeks of reconnaissance disguised as a wandering servant seeking work. 3 weeks of watching, learning, waiting. The carriage lurched to a halt. Through the frost-covered window, the keep materialized from the storm like a beast rising from deep water. Massive stone walls, black as obsidian, climbed toward a sky choked with snow. The gates loomed ahead, carved with a sigil that made her breath catch despite her training. A wolf's head, split perfectly down the center. Half light, half shadow. Half salvation, half damnation. She'd seen that sigil before. In fire, in blood, in the nightmares that still woke her gasping in the hours before dawn. The driver's voice cut through her thoughts. "Thornveil Keep, miss. You sure about this? They say strange things happen to women who cross that threshold." Elara gathered her small pack, checking the weight of concealed weapons with practiced efficiency. Wolfsbane powder in the hollow of her locket, silver throwing knife strapped to her inner thigh. The larger blade, the killing blade, nestled against her ribs beneath layers of wool and leather. "I'm sure," she said, her voice carrying none of the storm raging in her chest. 15 years. 15 years since the night her world burned. 15 years since Alpha Gareth, her father, died screaming in flames while his pack scattered like leaves before a hurricane. 15 years since she'd sworn on his cooling corpse that she would make the Thornveil Alpha pay for every drop of blood moon blood spilled that night. The carriage door opened. Wind and snow struck her face like a physical blow, but Elara stepped down with the grace of a predator entering new territory. Her boots crunched against ice as she approached the gates. Each step was measured, calculated. She was not Elara Vale, trained assassin. She was Elara Vale, desperate servant seeking employment. Harmless, invisible, exactly what she needed to be. 2 guards emerged from the shadows flanking the gate. Both wore the same rank insignias she'd studied in stolen documents. Beta-class wolves, disciplined and alert. Their eyes tracked her movement with the intensity of trained soldiers. Good. That meant the keep ran on military structure, not chaos. Structure had patterns. Patterns had weaknesses. "Name!" the first guard barked, his breath steaming in the frozen air. "Elara Vale." Her own breath formed clouds that dissipated between them. She kept her eyes lowered, shoulders slightly hunched. The posture of submission, of someone who knew their place in the hierarchy of power. "Purpose? Seeking work. I was told the keep needs servants for the main hall." The guards exchanged glances. Something passed between them, some unspoken communication that made the hair on the back of her neck prickle with awareness. The second guard stepped closer, and she caught his scent beneath the storm. Pine and wet fur and something sharper. Suspicion. "You know what happened to the last servant assigned to the main hall?" His voice was low, almost gentle, a warning wrapped in kindness. "No." Elara met his eyes briefly, then looked away, long enough to seem curious but not defiant. "Should I?" "She lasted 3 days." The guard's expression remained neutral, but his hand rested on the pommel of his sword. "Most don't make it past 2. The Alpha, he's got certain requirements. Not everyone can handle being near him for long." "I can handle myself." The words came out steadier than she felt, because beneath her cloak, beneath the layers of wool and determination, something was wrong. The old scar on her collarbone, the one she'd carried since childhood, the one she'd been told came from a rogue wolf attack during the raid, had begun to burn. Not the dull ache of an old wound remembering trauma. This was active, immediate, as if someone had pressed a brand directly to her skin. Elara forced her breathing to remain even, her expression unchanged. Pain was old familiar territory. She'd learned to dance with it years ago. The first guard grunted. Your funeral. Gate opens twice a day, dawn and dusk. Miss either opening and you're locked in until the next. No exceptions. I understand. One more thing. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to something that might have been pity. In the main hall, you don't look directly at the Alpha. You don't speak unless spoken to. And if he tells you to leave, you run. You don't walk, you don't ask questions. You run like your life depends on it, because it does. Clear? Clear. The gates groaned open, the sound of ancient metal grinding against stone. Beyond them, the courtyard spread wide and empty, snow accumulating in drifts against the inner walls. Torches burned in iron sconces, their flames writhing against the wind, casting shadows that seemed to move with predatory intent. Elara counted her steps as she crossed the threshold. 40 paces to the main entrance. 3 side passages visible from here, 2 leading east, 1 west. Guard stations at regular intervals, currently unmanned due to the storm. The moment her boot touched the cobblestones inside the gate, the burning in her scar intensified. White-hot pain lanced through her shoulder, radiating down her arm and up her neck. She stumbled, caught herself, forced her legs to keep moving. This wasn't right. Old scars didn't suddenly come alive. Old wounds didn't wake up screaming after 15 years of silence, unless they weren't wounds at all. The thought flickered through her mind and was immediately dismissed. Impossible. She'd been 8 years old when the Thornveil wolves had slaughtered her pack. 8 years old and found half dead in the ruins, her neck torn open, her father's blood still warm on her hands. The healers who'd taken her in, the warriors who'd trained her, they'd all confirmed it. A rogue wolf's mark, vicious and random, nothing more. But as she climbed the steps to the main entrance, as the massive doors swung open to reveal the grand hall beyond, doubt crept into the spaces between her certainty. Because the pain in her scar pulsed in rhythm with something else, something deeper, something that felt less like memory and more like recognition. The grand hall stole her breath despite her preparation. She'd seen drawings, studied floor plans, memorized dimensions and distances. None of it captured the reality. The ceiling soared 3 stories above, supported by columns carved from single pieces of stone. Enormous fireplaces burned at each end, their flames casting dancing light across walls hung with weapons and banners. Long tables stretched the length of the room, polished wood gleaming beneath scattered documents and half-emptied goblets. But it was the figure at the far end, standing with his back to her beside the largest fireplace, that commanded every particle of her attention. Tall, broad-shouldered, his black coat hung open despite the cold, revealing the white shirt beneath. His hair caught the firelight, dark as midnight with threads of silver at the temples. He stood with the absolute stillness of a predator that had no need to prove its dominance. The stillness itself was the proof. Around him, a dozen wolves of various ranks huddled in discussion, their voices low and urgent. Elara caught fragments as she approached: border skirmish, Iron Peak pack, supply routes, casualties, the language of war being spoken in measured tactical terms. "Flank from the ridgeline," the man said without turning, his voice carrying easily across the hall despite its low pitch. "Cut their supply route here." He gestured to something she couldn't see, presumably a map. "Force surrender in 48 hours or less. We don't have resources for extended engagement." "Alpha, if Iron Peak commits their full force, then we adapt." Still, he didn't turn. "That's why we're warriors, Marcus. Adaptation under pressure. Now get the scouts out. I want eyes on every approach by dawn." The wolves scattered like smoke before wind, moving with the coordinated precision of a military unit. Within seconds, the vast hall contained only 2 people: Elara, standing 30 paces from the fireplace with her hands folded in front of her, her head slightly bowed, and the Alpha, who had finally turned to face her. The world tilted. She'd prepared for this moment, rehearsed it, spent countless hours steeling herself for the sight of the monster who'd destroyed everything she loved. She'd expected to feel rage, cold and pure and clarifying. She'd expected hate to pour through her veins like liquid metal, sharpening her resolve, confirming her purpose. She hadn't expected her scar to explode with pain so intense her knees nearly buckled. She hadn't expected him to freeze mid-sentence, his entire body going rigid as if struck. She hadn't expected those eyes, storm gray, haunted, ancient. They locked onto hers with an intensity that felt physical, as if he could see through skin and bone directly into her soul. His nostrils flared slightly, and she realized with a start that he was scenting her, reading her the way predators read prey, cataloging information she didn't know she was broadcasting. New blood. His voice was rough velvet scraped over gravel, 2 words that somehow contained multitudes: curiosity, confusion, and beneath it all, something that sounded dangerously close to recognition. A man appeared from the shadows near the fireplace. Younger than the Alpha by perhaps a decade, his features sharp and angular, his eyes carrying the alertness of someone who'd survived by never being caught off guard. He wore the insignia of a Beta, second in command, the Alpha's right hand. "Alara Vale, Alpha," the Beta said, his voice professionally neutral. "New attendant for the main hall, came through the storm." The Alpha didn't acknowledge the introduction. He stepped closer, and Alara had to force herself not to step back. Training screamed assessments through her mind. 6'4", 220 pounds of lean muscle, moves like a trained fighter, weight balanced, vulnerable points protected without seeming guarded. She could reach his throat, the inside of his knee, his liver. 3 killing strikes, each one possible if she was fast enough, if she caught him off guard, if the silver blade did its work before he could shift. But those eyes were searching hers like he knew her, like he remembered her, like he was trying to solve a puzzle that shouldn't exist. "You," he started, then stopped. His jaw worked silently for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something dangerous. "Leave us." The Beta hesitated. "Alpha, the Council." "I said leave us, Caspian." Not a shout, barely above a whisper. But every wolf within earshot scattered as if he'd roared. Within heartbeats, the grand hall echoed with emptiness. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of fire and the wind howling against the windows. Alara kept her breathing steady, her hands loose and ready. If he attacked now, she could draw the blade at her ribs in less than a second. The element of surprise would give her 1 chance, maybe 2, before his superior strength overwhelmed her. The Alpha circled her slowly, and now she did turn, keeping him in her line of sight. Predator and prey, each assessing the other, each waiting for the first move. "Where are you from?" His voice was tight, controlled, but underneath she heard something else, something that might have been desperation. "Valley settlements below the pass." The lie came smooth as silk. She'd practiced it until it felt like truth. "That mark on your neck." He stopped circling, standing at an angle where the firelight illuminated his face. "How did you get it?" Alara's hand flew instinctively to her collar, where the old scar hid beneath fabric. "Rogue attack when I was a child." His eyes flashed gold. Just for an instant, but she saw it. Saw the wolf looking out through human eyes, saw the beast that lived beneath the civilized surface. "Rogues don't mark like that," he said, his voice dropping to a growl that vibrated in her chest. "That's an Alpha's mark, a claiming, and it's old, 15 years if I'm reading it right." Ice flooded her veins. How could he possibly know? The scar was hidden, barely visible even when exposed. She'd never told anyone its precise age, had never known it herself. The healers who'd found her had estimated based on healing stages, but they'd never been certain. Then what does mark like that? The question came out harder than she intended, closer to challenge than curiosity. Dangerous. She needed to seem helpless, not hostile. The Alpha's expression flickered through emotions too fast to read. Pain, guilt, something that might have been longing. He took another step closer, so close now she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell pine and smoke and storm on his skin. "An Alpha who's lost control," he whispered. "An Alpha who marked someone without meaning to, without permission, without understanding the consequences until it was too late." Then he did something that shattered every expectation she'd built. He stepped back, turned away, walked 3 paces toward the fire and stopped, his shoulders rigid with tension. "You shouldn't be here." The words sounded torn from somewhere deep inside him. "This keep isn't safe. I'm not safe. Whatever brought you through that gate, whatever you're running from, it's not as dangerous as staying." Alara's mind raced. This wasn't the monster from her nightmares. This wasn't the ruthless killer who'd burned her world to ash. This was a man who looked haunted, who carried guilt like armor, who was warning her away instead of asserting dominance. Unless it was a trap. Unless this was how he hunted, with kindness and vulnerability and concern, drawing victims close before the wolf took over. "Then why did they send me?" she asked, testing, probing for weakness. "Because they don't know what I am when I lose control." He turned back to her, and the raw honesty in his face made something in her chest twist. "Because the last woman who served here died, and they think another one might somehow survive. Because this pack is desperate enough to keep trying, despite knowing the odds." He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, and this time Alara did step back, her hand moving toward the hidden blade. But he stopped just outside her reach, his hands open and empty at his sides. "Listen to me very carefully, Alara Vale from the Valley Settlements." His eyes burned into hers. "Every full moon, I lock myself in chains in the deepest cellar of this keep. Every full moon, the wolf takes over, and I become something that doesn't recognize friend from prey. And every full moon, I wake up remembering the taste of blood and praying it wasn't someone I was supposed to protect." "Why are you telling me this?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "Because you deserve to know what you're walking into." He raised one hand slowly, telegraphing the movement, and brushed his fingers just above her collar without touching skin. But even that proximity made the scar beneath burn hotter. "And because I know your scent, impossible as it is, I know it. Smoke, old smoke from burning pine, and blood moon pack blood." The room spun. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew. Her cover was destroyed before she'd even attempted to get close. Every week of preparation, every carefully constructed lie, shattered in seconds. But he wasn't attacking, wasn't calling for guards, wasn't doing anything except standing there looking at her with something that might have been grief. "You're Blood Moon," he said quietly, and it wasn't a question. "You're here for revenge. I don't blame you." Alara's hand closed around the hidden blade, drawing it in one smooth motion. The silver gleamed in the firelight, its edge sharp enough to split moonbeams. She pressed the point against his chest, directly over his heart, and waited for him to react. Waited for the attack, the transformation, the violence she'd been trained to expect. He didn't move, didn't even look at the blade, just kept his eyes locked on hers. "Do it," he said. "Make it quick. I'm tired of waiting." The blade trembled in her grip. This wasn't right. Nothing about this was following the script she'd written in her head. "You killed my family." Her voice cracked despite her training. "My father, my entire pack." "Yes." No denial, no excuse, just acceptance, absolute and unflinching. "I did." "Why?" The question burst from her before she could stop it. "Because your father, Alpha Gareth, ambushed my scouts." His voice remained level, factual. "Killed 12 of my wolves while they slept. Mutilated their bodies as a message. I gave him a chance to surrender, to face judgment, to pay reparations. He chose war instead. Lies. Had to be lies. The elders who'd raised her, who'd trained her, they'd told her the truth. Thornveil had attacked without provocation, without mercy, without honor. They'd slaughtered innocents and burned everything to cover their crimes. "You're lying," she spat, pressing the blade harder against his chest. A thin line of red appeared where the point broke skin. "Am I?" Something flickered in his eyes. Not anger. Something worse. Pity. Ask yourself this, Alara Vale. Why would the survivors of Blood Moon Pack send a 23-year-old woman alone to kill an alpha instead of coming themselves? Why would they train a child for 15 years and then throw her at me like a sacrificial lamb? The blade wavered, because she'd asked herself that question. Late at night, in the dark hours between sleep and waking, she'd wondered why the elders always had excuses. Too old to fight, too weak to face an alpha, too important to risk losing when the future of Blood Moon depended on them rebuilding. But sending her? That was different. That was investment in revenge, in justice, in honor restored, wasn't it? "They love me," she whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Maybe." The alpha's voice gentled, and that somehow made it worse. "Or maybe they knew I'd recognize you. Maybe they knew what would happen when you crossed my threshold. Maybe they're counting on it." "Recognize me? I was 8 years old. I was nobody." "You were someone." His hand moved slowly, telegraphing intent, and touched his own neck where her scar mirrored. "You were the child I pulled from the flames, the daughter who held her dying father while my wolves secured the perimeter, The little girl whose last memory before her heart stopped was me promising you'd be safe. The blade clattered to the stone floor. Elara stumbled backward, her legs hitting a chair that sent her sprawling. Pain exploded in her scar, so intense the world went white for 3 eternal seconds. And in that whiteness, memory erupted. Fire. Everywhere fire, eating through wood and flesh and hope. Her father's voice, not the gentle tone she remembered, but something hard and cruel. Let them come, we'll slaughter them all. Laughter. He'd been laughing as the world burned. Sounds of battle, screaming, the clash of weapons and the wet sounds of bodies being torn apart. She was hiding, small enough to wedge herself into a space between burning timbers, watching through a crack as wolves in Thornveil colors poured through breaches in the walls. But they weren't slaughtering, they were subduing, disarming, offering quarter to those who surrendered. It was her father's wolves, the Blood Moon warriors, who fought like rabid animals, who refused mercy, who died rather than yield. A massive black wolf burst through the flames directly toward her hiding place. She screamed, certain death had found her at last. But the wolf shifted mid-stride, becoming a man with storm-gray eyes, and those eyes were gentle despite the blood and ash covering his skin. "I've got you," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You're safe now, little one." He'd lifted her from the wreckage, cradled her against his chest as he ran through smoke and fire toward safety. She remembered feeling his heartbeat, strong and steady, remembered the way his arms held her like she was something precious and fragile and worth protecting. Then pain, sudden and absolute, her neck burning like someone had pressed coals against her skin. The man's arms tightening, his voice changing to something between human and animal. "No, no, 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 I didn't mean to. Please don't, please." Shouting, other voices. "She's not breathing. The bond shock is killing her. Sever it now or she dies." Hands on her, magic, cold and sharp as winter stars. The feeling of something being cut, severed, locked away behind walls of power. A woman's voice, old and tired. "She'll live, but she won't remember. Can't remember. The trauma would destroy what's left of her." Then darkness, deep and complete and mercifully empty. Elara came back to herself lying on the cold stone floor of the grand hall, her face wet with tears. She hadn't known she was crying. The Alpha knelt beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence like a physical thing. "You remember," he said, and it wasn't a question. "You saved me." The words felt like glass in her throat. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried to." His voice carried 15 years of grief. "After Maris sealed your memory, after she sent you away to heal, I tracked you for months. But every time I got close, your handlers moved you, and eventually I realized they were doing it on purpose. Someone was keeping you hidden. Someone wanted you to forget. The elders." Understanding crashed through her like an avalanche. "The ones who raised me, trained me, sent me here. They wanted me dead." He shifted position, sitting fully on the floor across from her, maintaining that careful distance. "And they were smart enough to know I couldn't kill you. Not after marking you, even accidentally. Not after almost dying trying to save you from my own wolf's instincts." "Why?" She pushed herself upright, wiping her face with shaking hands. "Why would you mark a child?" "I didn't mean to." The anguish in his voice was palpable. "When I lifted you from the wreckage, when I felt how close you were to death, my wolf reacted. It saw a dying pup and tried to save you the only way it knew how, by claiming you, by binding you to my strength, my life force. It was instinct, not intention, and it nearly killed me." "Yes." He looked away, jaw clenched. "The bond formed too early, too fast, too wrong. Your body couldn't handle the influx of power. Your heart stopped twice before Maris managed to sever the connection and lock away your memory of it. I thought sending you away, letting you grow up normal and safe, was the right choice. But someone redirected me." Elara's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. "The healers Maris sent me to, I never reached them. The warriors who found me instead, who told me my father died heroically defending against unprovoked attack, who raised me to be a weapon pointed at your heart. Someone wanted this." The Alpha's hands curled into fists against his thighs. "Wanted you here. Wanted you close enough to kill me, knowing I couldn't defend myself, knowing the moment you crossed my threshold, the old bond would wake up screaming. Is that why my scar burns? She touched her collar, feeling the heat radiating beneath fabric. The bond recognizes what your mind forgot. He met her eyes again, and the intensity there made her breath catch. It knows you're home. This isn't my home. But even as she said it, something in her chest pulled tight, yearning toward him in a way that had nothing to do with logic or revenge or anything she'd spent 15 years believing. Maybe not yet. He rose slowly, offering her a hand up. She hesitated, then took it, feeling electricity arc between their palms at the contact. The scar flared again, but this time the pain held an edge of something else, something that might have been recognition or relief, or the phantom sensation of broken things trying to heal. He pulled her to her feet, then immediately released her hand and stepped back. But if you stay here, if you let the bond continue waking up, one of us will die. That's what Maris told me 15 years ago, what she warned me about. Bonds formed wrong can't survive. They consume the weaker party until nothing remains. Then I'll leave. The words should have felt like relief. Instead, they felt like tearing something vital from her chest. You can't. His expression was grim. Not anymore. The bond is already reestablishing itself. It's been growing stronger every second you've been within these walls. If you try to leave now, the separation will trigger the final stage. Death, fast and brutal for both of us. That's insane. But her scar was burning hotter, and she could feel it now. Could feel him, his presence like a second heartbeat beneath her own, pulsing in time with the pain. Welcome to my world, he said with a bitter smile, where the wolf makes decisions and the man has to live with them. Footsteps echoed from the corridor beyond the hall. Caspian appeared in the archway, his expression carefully neutral. Alpha, the council is waiting, and the scouts have returned with intelligence about Iron Peak movements. The Alpha held Alara's gaze for one more long moment. We're not done with this conversation. But right now, I have a war to prevent and a pact to protect. You'll be assigned quarters in the North Tower. Stay there. Don't wander. And whatever you do, don't go near the cellar entrance marked with wolfsbane. Some doors are locked for good reasons. He turned and strode away, Caspian falling into step beside him. Their voices drifted back, already deep in discussion of tactics and troop movements. Leaving Alara standing alone in the vast hall, her world shattered and remade in the span of minutes. She retrieved her silver blade from where it had fallen, sliding it back into its sheath with hands that had finally stopped shaking. The weapon felt different now, still deadly, still necessary perhaps, but no longer pointed at the throat of a monster. Because the real monsters, she was beginning to understand, were the ones who'd sent her here, the ones who'd twisted a child's trauma into a weapon, the ones who'd lied for 15 years and called it love. A young woman appeared at her elbow, making her jump, one of the serving staff, her eyes downcast, her movements practiced and subservient. "This way, miss," the woman murmured. "I'll show you to your quarters. Best to get settled before dark. Things get strange here after the sun goes down." Alara followed, her mind still reeling. As they climbed the stairs toward the North Tower, as the grand hall disappeared behind them, she touched her collar one more time. The scar beneath pulsed with heat and something else, something that felt disturbingly like anticipation. Whatever game was being played here, whatever trap had been laid, she was in it now. Caught between the lies she'd believed and the truth she was only beginning to understand. Between the mission she'd trained for and the reality of a man who'd saved her life at the cost of his own peace. And somewhere in the depths of this ancient keep, behind a door marked with wolfsbane, something waited, something that had called to her in the voice of a dying woman, but was really something much older, much darker, much more intimately connected to the bond burning beneath her skin. The North Tower room was smaller than expected, but surprisingly comfortable. A narrow bed with thick furs, a wash basin that still held warmth from recently poured water, a window overlooking the courtyard where snow continued its relentless accumulation. The serving woman had left her with instructions about meal times and protocols, then disappeared so quickly Alara wondered if she'd been warned to minimize contact. Smart woman. Alara tested the window latch. Locked from the outside, she discovered, running her fingers along the frame. Not a prison exactly, but not free passage either. The door had no lock she could see, but when she tried the handle, she felt resistance. Magic, subtle but present, woven into the wood itself. She could break through if necessary, but it would take time and make noise. More concerning was the burning in her scar, which hadn't diminished even slightly since entering the keep. If anything, it had intensified. A constant low-grade agony that made her skin feel too tight, her blood too hot. She pressed her palm against it, feeling the heat radiating outward, and tried to remember the medical texts she'd studied during training. Bond sickness, they'd called it in the old stories. When a marking went wrong, when the magic that bound Alpha to mate turned septic instead of sacred. The symptoms included burning at the mark site, heightened emotional states, inability to separate physically from the one who'd marked you. In severe cases, attempting separation triggered catastrophic failure of major organs. Heart first, then lungs, then brain, all shutting down in a cascade of agony that could take hours or seconds, depending on the strength of the original bond. Death fast and brutal for both of us. Theron's words echoed in her memory. She paced the small room, trying to organize her thoughts into something resembling a plan. The mission was compromised. Her cover was blown. Everything she'd believed about her past had been revealed as lies built on manipulation. But beneath the shock and confusion, her tactical mind was still working, still analyzing. Someone had engineered this. Someone with extensive knowledge of bond magic and pack politics. Someone who'd known exactly how to redirect an 8-year-old girl, how to shape her into a weapon, how to send her back at precisely the moment when the dormant bond would reawaken. The question was why. If they'd simply wanted Theron dead, there were easier methods. Poison, ambush, a coordinated assault during the new moon when his wolf was weakest. Why the elaborate setup? Why wait 15 years? Unless killing him wasn't the primary goal. Unless the point was something more complex, more political, more devastating to Thornveil than just removing its alpha. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Elara's hand moved instinctively to her blade before she caught herself. Enter. The door opened to reveal Caspian, the beta, carrying a tray laden with food that smelled significantly better than she'd expected. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes tracked her movement with the wariness of someone who'd learned not to underestimate threats. "The Alpha thought you might be hungry," he said, setting the tray on the small table near the window, "given that you probably haven't eaten since before the storm." "Thank you." Elara didn't move closer, maintaining the distance between them. "Is it poisoned?" Something that might have been respect flickered across Caspian's face. If the Alpha wanted you dead, he wouldn't use poison. Too uncertain, too easy to survive if you have the right constitution. Good to know. She approached the tray, examining its contents. Roasted meat, root vegetables, bread still warm from the oven, a flagon of what smelled like spiced wine. Her stomach cramped with sudden hunger, reminding her that she hadn't eaten in nearly 20 hours. But training overrode appetite. Never eat food you haven't watched being prepared. Never trust drinks poured by unfamiliar hands. Caspian watched her hesitate and sighed. "I'll eat some first if it makes you feel better." Without waiting for permission, he tore off a piece of bread, chewed, swallowed, took a sip of the wine, then a bite of the meat. "See? Not poisoned, just dinner. You could have built up immunity." "I could have." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "But I haven't. The Alpha wants you alive and healthy. Whatever he might be, he's not the kind of man who poisons helpless women." "I'm not helpless." "No," Caspian agreed, his eyes sharp. "You're not, which makes this whole situation significantly more interesting." Elara picked up the bread, tore off a small piece, tasted it. The flavors exploded on her tongue, rich and satisfying in a way that ration bars and trail food had never managed. She forced herself to eat slowly, to maintain control despite her body's demands for fuel. "Why interesting?" she asked between bites. "Because you're blood moon." Caspian's voice was matter of fact, but something in his posture had shifted. More alert, more dangerous. "Because you came here to kill him. Because somehow, impossibly, you're the girl from 15 years ago, the one who nearly destroyed him just by existing." "I nearly destroyed him?" Elara set down the bread, anger flaring hot. "He destroyed my pack. He destroyed my life." "Did he?" Caspian pushed off from the doorframe, took 2 steps into the room. Not threatening, but not casual either. Or did your pack destroy itself by attacking Thornveil scouts without provocation? Did your father destroy your life by choosing pride over surrender, ego over the safety of his people? My father was a good man. Your father was a tyrant who ruled through fear and violence. The words came out flat, factual, devastating. I know. I was there. I watched him torture prisoners. I watched him order the execution of wolves who questioned his decisions. I watched him laugh while Thornveil scouts screamed and bled in his courtyard. Alara's vision swam. More lies, her mind insisted. More manipulation. But something in Caspian's eyes made her pause. Something that looked like old grief, old anger, old guilt. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because you deserve truth for once in your life." Caspian's expression softened slightly. "Because I watched what happened after we brought you back from that raid. Watched Theron pace the keep for 3 days straight while Maris fought to save you. Watched him nearly rip his own throat out when his wolf tried to reclaim the bond that was killing you. Watched him break down when he realized the only way to save your life was to erase himself from your memory completely." He paused, his jaw working as if choosing his next words carefully. "And then I watched him spend the next 15 years alone, refusing to take another mate, refusing to even consider forming new bonds, because some part of him was still connected to a little girl he'd saved once, a girl who was supposed to grow up safe and normal and happy far away from this place." "Then why did I end up back here?" Alara demanded. "If he wanted me safe, if he cared so much, why am I standing in this room?" "That's what we're trying to figure out." Caspian moved to the window, looked out at the darkening courtyard. Someone orchestrated this. Someone with access to old pack records, knowledge of bond magic, and enough patience to wait 15 years for the perfect moment to strike. Perfect moment? Iron Peak is mobilizing for war. He turned back to her, his expression grim. "We're facing our largest external threat in a generation. Our alpha is distracted, stressed, vulnerable, and suddenly you appear, carrying a bond that could kill him if it goes wrong. Convenient timing, don't you think?" Alara's mind raced through the implications. "You think my handlers are working with Iron Peak. I think your handlers are using you as a weapon aimed at Theron's heart at precisely the moment when he can least afford the distraction." Caspian's eyes were hard. "And I think you need to decide very quickly whose side you're actually on, because in 3 days, Iron Peak will be at our gates, and if the Alpha is dealing with bond sickness, if he's weakened or distracted or dead, Thornveil falls. Every wolf in this keep dies or becomes a slave to a pack that makes your father look merciful by comparison." The weight of it settled on her shoulders like a physical thing. She'd come here for revenge, simple, clean, justified revenge against the monster who'd destroyed her world. But the monster was a man who'd saved her life. The revenge was based on lies, and the real threat wasn't the past at all. It was whatever was coming through those gates in 3 days. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. "Help us." Caspian's voice was direct, honest, urgent. "Help us figure out who set this in motion. Help us prepare for what's coming. And help Theron survive the bond long enough to see the other side of this war." "Why would I help the pack that killed my family?" "Because your family was already dead." The words were harsh but not cruel. Blood Moon was dying from the inside, rotting under your father's rule. Theron didn't destroy it. He ended what was already broken, gave the survivors a chance to scatter, to start over, to build something better somewhere else. "And the ones who didn't survive?" Alara's voice cracked. "What about them?" "They made their choices." Caspian held her gaze steadily. "Just like you're making yours right now. You can cling to lies and revenge and let everyone here die for something that happened 15 years ago. Or you can accept that the world is more complicated than the story you were told and fight for something that actually matters." Silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of decisions that couldn't be unmade once spoken aloud. "I need to think," Alara said finally. "Think fast." Caspian headed for the door, paused with his hand on the frame. "And stay away from the cellar. I mean it. The door marked with wolfsbane isn't locked to keep people out. It's locked to keep something in, something that recognizes your scent now, something that will call to you in voices that sound like safety and home and everything you've ever wanted. Don't listen. Don't go, because what's down there isn't your salvation." "What is it?" "The part of him that can't tell the difference between protecting you and consuming you." Caspian's expression was haunted. The wolf that wants to finish what it started 15 years ago. And if you let it, if you open that door, you'll both die screaming. He left, closing the door with a soft click that somehow felt final. Alara stood alone in the small room, the untouched meal cooling on the table, the scar on her neck burning with relentless intensity. Outside, full darkness had fallen. The storm had passed, leaving behind crystalline silence, broken only by the occasional howl of wind through stone passages. And beneath it all, so faint, she wasn't sure if she was hearing it, or feeling it, or imagining it entirely. A voice, low and rough and intimate as a lover's whisper. "Come down," it seemed to say. "Come home. Let me show you what we could be." Alara pressed her hands over her ears, but the voice didn't stop, because it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the bond itself, from the connection that pulsed beneath her skin, from the mark that remembered even if she didn't. She thought about Caspian's warning, thought about Theron's fear, thought about 15 years of carefully constructed lies crumbling under the weight of truth. And then, because she was a warrior, and warriors needed intelligence to make strategic decisions, because she'd never been good at following orders that didn't make sense, because something in her chest was pulling toward that cellar door like iron to a lodestone, she made her choice. She would go down. She would see what they were so desperate to keep her from. She would look into the eyes of the wolf that had marked her and judge for herself whether it was monster or protector or something caught between the two. But not tonight. Tonight she would rest, eat, think, build her strength for what was coming. Because Caspian was right about one thing. In 3 days, Iron Peak would be at the gates. And whatever happened in this keep, whatever truth she uncovered about her past, about the bond, about the man who'd saved her life, and the wolves who'd twisted her into a weapon, none of it would matter if they were all dead. The sun was setting beyond the windows, painting the snow crimson. Night was coming, and with it, answers she wasn't sure she wanted to find. But she would find them anyway, because she was still a warrior, still a weapon, still someone who needed to know the truth even if it destroyed her. The game had changed, but it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Sleep, when it finally came, brought no peace. Alara's dreams were fragments of fire and memory, shattered glass reflecting images she couldn't quite piece together. Her father's face, laughing as the world burned. Theron's arms, cradling her like something precious. The moment her heart stopped, and the desperate magic that tried to restart it. The severing, sharp and absolute that left her hollow and reformed. She woke before dawn with the scar burning hot enough to make her gasp. The room was still dark, but beyond the window, the faintest hint of gray touched the eastern sky. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a world wrapped in pristine snow and deadly cold. Alara dressed quickly, efficiently, her hands moving through the familiar routine of checking weapons and securing them in places where they'd be accessible but hidden. The silver blade at her ribs, the smaller knife in her boot, the wolfsbane powder in her locket, though she was beginning to doubt its usefulness against what she'd found here. The door opened when she tried it. The magical resistance from last night apparently lifted. Either they trusted her, or they didn't consider her enough of a threat to bother imprisoning. Neither option was particularly flattering. The corridors were nearly empty at this hour, just a few early servants moving through their duties with the quiet efficiency of people who understood the value of invisibility. Alara moved among them like a ghost, memorizing the layout as she walked. 3 main staircases connecting the levels. Guard stations at key junctions, currently manned but drowsy with the tail end of night watch. The great hall visible through an archway, already showing signs of activity as wolves gathered for what looked like a strategy session. And below, accessible through a narrow passage behind the kitchens, the stairs leading down. The cellar entrance marked with wolfsbane was exactly where Caspian had implied it would be. Old wooden door, reinforced with iron bands that showed signs of being tested from the inside. Deep claw marks gouged into the wood, and hanging from the frame, bundles of dried wolfsbane, their purple flowers long dead, but their magic still potent enough to make Alara's skin prickle from 3 feet away. She stood at the top of the stairs, looking down into darkness, and felt the pull intensify. Not just the scar now. Her entire body seemed to lean toward that door, muscles trembling with the effort of staying still. "Come down!" The voice was clearer here, stronger. "Let me see you. Let me remember what we were." "Bad idea," she muttered to herself. "Spectacularly bad idea." but her feet were already moving, carrying her down the stone steps before her rational mind could override the impulse. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with moisture and something else, something that smelled like wild places and old magic and the particular musk of a predator in its den. The door stood at the bottom, and even without touching it, Elara could feel the power radiating from its surface. Not just locks, though those were present. Wards, layered thick and complex, designed to contain something that really, really didn't want to be contained. She reached for the handle. "I wouldn't." Elara spun, blade drawn before she'd consciously registered the movement. Theron stood 3 steps above her, fully dressed despite the early hour, his expression unreadable in the dim light filtering down from above. "How long have you been there?" she demanded, not lowering the blade. "Since you left your room." He descended the remaining steps with careful, deliberate movements, keeping his hands visible and unthreatening. "I told Caspian to lift the ward on your door, wanted to see what you do with freedom. And I went exactly where you told me not to." Elara finally sheathed the knife, feeling foolish. "Congratulations. You were right about me." "I wasn't testing you." Theron stopped at the base of the stairs, maintaining distance between them. "I was testing the bond, seeing how strong the pull would be now that it's waking up. Strong enough to get me killed, apparently. Strong enough to be dangerous." His eyes moved past her to the door, and something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or longing, or dread. "It wants you, the wolf. It remembers your scent from 15 years ago, remembers how you felt in my arms, remembers the taste of your fear and your trust all mixed together, and it wants to finish what it started." "Which is?" "Claiming you completely." Theron's voice was rough. "Making you mine in every way that matters to a wolf. Binding you so thoroughly that separation becomes literally impossible. And in the process, probably killing us both, because the bond still isn't stable, still isn't accepted by the moon, still carries the same fundamental flaw it had 15 years ago." Elara touched her scar, feeling the heat pulsing beneath her fingers. "What flaw?" "You were a child. You weren't old enough to consent, to understand, to survive the magic involved in a true mating bond." He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture betraying frustration or exhaustion or both. "The moon doesn't bless bonds formed through force or accident. It only accepts unions built on choice, on equality, on mutual recognition of what's being given and received." "But we're not children anymore." "No." His eyes met hers, and the intensity there made her breath catch. "Which is why the bond is trying to complete itself now. Why your scar burns. Why I spent last night pacing the battlements instead of sleeping. Because being under the same roof as you is like standing next to a bonfire and pretending I'm not burning alive." The admission hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying in its implications. "Then we break it," Elara said. "Find Maris, have her sever it again, this time permanently." "Already asked." Theron's expression was grim. "She says it's too late. The bond has reestablished itself too deeply. Trying to cut it now would be like trying to remove a tree's roots after they've grown through the foundation of a house. Everything collapses. So we're just stuck." Alara's hands curled into fists at her sides, trapped together by magic neither of us wanted. "Unless—" Theron hesitated, then continued, the words clearly difficult. "Unless we complete it properly. With consent. With understanding. With both of us choosing it freely, instead of having it forced on us by circumstances." "You're suggesting we mate." The words felt strange in her mouth, too intimate, too permanent. "I'm suggesting we acknowledge what's already happening and take control of it before it kills us." He stepped closer, and this time Elara didn't back away. "The bond wants completion. Fine. We give it completion, but on our terms. Slowly, carefully, with Maris guiding us to make sure we don't trigger another rejection. And if it doesn't work, then we die. Simple, direct, honest. But at least we die having tried something other than fighting fate every step of the way." Elara studied his face, looking for manipulation, for hidden agenda, for any sign that this was another trap being laid by someone who'd proven very good at surviving through careful strategy. But all she saw was a man who looked as tired as she felt, caught in the same impossible situation, trying to find a path through that didn't end in catastrophe. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to think, time to understand what I'd be agreeing to." "We don't have much time." Theron gestured toward the stairs. "Iron Peak will be here in 3 days. If we're going to stabilize the bond before then, we need to start now. 3 days to decide if I want to spend the rest of my life magically bound to the man who killed my father." Alara laughed, but there was no humor in it. No pressure. "Your father would have killed me if he'd had the chance." Theron's voice was matter-of-fact, not defensive. "Would have killed you too, eventually, once you were old enough to question his decisions. That's who Gareth was. A tyrant who saw everyone, including his own daughter, as tools to be used. You didn't know him. I knew men like him. I fought them, negotiated with them, watched them destroy their own packs from the inside." He met her eyes steadily. "And I know what I saw in those last moments before he died. He wasn't protecting you, Alara. He was using you as a human shield. I had to go through you to get to him, and he was counting on me hesitating long enough for his wolves to rally." The words hit like physical blows, because somewhere deep down, in the places she didn't like to examine too closely, she'd always wondered, always questioned why her father had pulled her in front of him instead of pushing her behind, why his last words hadn't been, "I love you," or "run," or anything that sounded like a father protecting his child. "Come on," Theron said, starting up the stairs. "If you're going to make an informed decision, you need to see something first." She followed, because the alternative was standing alone in the dark, staring at a door that called to her in voices that promised belonging and safety and everything she'd lost. They climbed past the ground floor, past the level where her quarters were located, up and up until they reached the top of the North Tower. The war room spread before them, lit by morning light streaming through tall windows. Maps covered every available surface. Troop movements marked in different colors, supply lines, defensive positions, estimated enemy strength, and standing around the largest table, a dozen wolves in various states of alertness, all focused on the tactical discussion happening in low, urgent voices. Caspian looked up as they entered. "Alpha, we've got new intelligence from the scouts." "Show me." Theron moved to the table, and Alara found herself following, drawn by curiosity, despite her intention to maintain distance. The map showed the territory surrounding Thornveil Keep in precise detail. Mountains to the north and west, providing natural defense. Forest to the south, dense enough to slow any large force. And to the east, the plains where Iron Peak Pack controlled territory stretching for miles. "They've massed here." Caspian pointed to a position roughly 2 days' march from Thornveil. 200 wolves, maybe more. Supply train indicates they're prepared for extended siege. "Defenses?" Theron's voice had changed, becoming sharper, more focused. This was the commander Alara had glimpsed yesterday, the tactical mind that had kept Thornveil alive through generations of conflict. "We've reinforced the main gates, stockpiled provisions for a month, positioned archers on the battlements." An older wolf, gray-haired but still powerful, gestured to marks on the map. "But we're outnumbered nearly 3 to 1. If they commit to a direct assault, we'll hold for maybe a week before the walls are breached." "Then we don't let them assault directly." Theron studied the map, his fingers tracing routes and positions. "We make them think we're weaker than we are. Draw them in close, make them overcommit, then hit them where they're vulnerable." "Their supply line." Alara heard herself speak before consciously deciding to participate. All eyes turned to her, some curious, most suspicious. She ignored them, focusing on the map. "They're 2 days out with a force that size. They need constant resupply. Food, weapons, medical supplies. Cut the supply line, you force them to either retreat or attack before they're ready." Silence greeted her words. Then Theron smiled, and it transformed his face from stern commander to something almost boyish. "Exactly, Caspian, how many wolves can we spare for a strike team?" 20, maybe 25 if we thin the wall defenses." "Do it. Split them into 3 groups. Hit the supply train from multiple angles, maximum chaos, then fade back into the forest before Iron Peak can mount a response." Theron's hands moved across the map, marking positions. "They'll have to divert forces to protect their supplies, which weakens their primary assault capability." "And if they ignore the supply hit and attack anyway?" the older wolf asked. "Then they're fighting hungry, undersupplied wolves who are getting desperate." Theron's expression was grim. "And desperate wolves make mistakes." The discussion continued, delving into specifics of timing and coordination. Alara found herself drawn in despite her reservations, her training making her see angles and possibilities others missed. Once, she interrupted to point out a potential ambush site. Another time, she suggested a feint that would draw enemy scouts away from the actual strike team's route. By the time the sun had fully risen, a plan had taken shape. 3 teams, striking at dawn tomorrow. Coordinated attacks on the supply train, timed to maximize confusion. And if it worked, Iron Peak would be forced to reconsider their timeline, maybe even negotiate instead of attacking. Good. Theron straightened from the table, rolling his shoulders to ease tension. Caspian, get the teams assembled and briefed. Marcus, I want those wall defenses reinforced by nightfall. Everyone else, you know your duties. The wolves dispersed, leaving Alara alone with Theron in the war room. He gathered several of the maps, rolled them carefully, then finally looked at her. You didn't have to help, he said quietly. I know. Alara moved to the window, looking out over the keep's walls to the forest beyond. But if Iron Peak takes Thornveil, I die too. The bond makes sure of that. Self-interest is a valid motivation. Is that what that was? She turned to face him. Because it felt more like I was watching someone who actually cares about his people. Someone who's trying to save lives instead of proving dominance. Someone who's exactly the opposite of what I was told to expect. Theron set down the maps and approached the window, standing beside her, but not quite close enough to touch. Your handlers wanted you to see a monster, needed you to, so you wouldn't hesitate when the time came to strike. But the truth is more complicated than their story allowed for. Everything seems more complicated than I was told. Alara's laugh was bitter. My whole life is built on lies, apparently. Not your whole life. His voice was gentle. The training is real. The strength you've developed. The mind that sees tactical possibilities. The courage it took to walk into the home of your enemy alone and unarmed except for a few hidden blades. That's all you, Alara. They might have shaped the weapon, but they didn't create it. The words settled into the hollow spaces inside her, not quite filling them, but at least acknowledging they existed. I need to see them, she said suddenly. My handlers, the elders who raised me. I need to hear from their own mouths why they sent me here. They won't tell you. Theron's expression was sympathetic but firm. If they're smart, and they've proven they are, they'll deny everything. Say you misunderstood, that they only wanted you to observe and report, that any violence was your own decision. Then I'll make them tell me another way. Alara's hand moved to her blade. I've got 15 years of training in persuasion techniques. They're 3 days south of here, camped in the foothills. The information came easily, without hesitation. I've had scouts watching them since you arrived. 4 elderly wolves, 2 females and 2 males, along with a younger handler who acts as muscle, well defended, warded against magical scrying, but not impossible to reach. Alara stared at him. You knew where they were and didn't tell me? I was waiting to see if you'd ask. Theron met her gaze steadily. And I wanted you to have time to think clearly before confronting them. Emotional decisions in hostile situations tend to end badly. I'm not emotional. But even as she said it, Alara could feel her heart pounding, anger and betrayal mixing with something that felt uncomfortably like grief. You're human. Or close enough. His hand moved as if to touch her shoulder, then stopped halfway, remembering distance and propriety. The bond doesn't erase emotion. It amplifies it. Everything you feel, I feel echoes of through the connection. Your anger, your confusion, your fear. It's all there, burning through the mark like wildfire. Can you hear my thoughts? No, just emotions. And only the strongest ones. He lowered his hand. It's not mind reading. More like standing in a room with someone who's radiating mood. You know they're angry without them having to say the words. That sounds invasive. It is. Theron's honesty was almost painful, and it gets worse as the bond strengthens. Eventually, if we complete it, we'll be able to sense each other across distances. Know when the other is in danger, in pain, in need. Some mated pairs learn to communicate entire concepts through the bond. Others find it overwhelming and have to learn shielding techniques to maintain any sense of individual privacy. You're really selling this whole mate bond thing. But there was no heat in her sarcasm, just exhausted resignation. I'm being honest about what you'd be agreeing to. He turned back to the maps, giving her space. You deserve to know exactly what the cost is before you decide if it's worth paying. Alara watched him work, seeing the careful precision in how he handled the documents, the way his eyes tracked over tactical information, absorbing and analyzing. This was a man who'd spent decades learning how to lead, how to protect, how to make impossible decisions and live with their consequences. Why didn't you take another mate? The question emerged before she could stop it. After you sent me away. 15 years is a long time to be alone. Theron's hands stilled on the maps. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. Because some part of me was always waiting, hoping maybe that you'd come back when you were grown, that we'd have a chance to do this right instead of having it torn away the first time. That's insane. Probably. He finally looked at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache. But the wolf doesn't understand probability or reason. It only understands that it marked you, that you're supposed to be mine, that everything else is just temporary distraction until you come home. This isn't my home. Not yet. He held her gaze. But it could be, if you chose it, if you decided that belonging somewhere, to someone, was worth the risk. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility and danger and the weight of decisions that couldn't be unmade. Elara felt the pull intensify, felt the bond reaching between them like invisible threads trying to weave them together. A knock on the door shattered the tension. Caspian entered without waiting for permission, his expression urgent. Alpha, we've got a problem. The scout team we sent to monitor the Blood Moon camp, they're missing. Last report was 6 hours ago, and they should have checked in twice since then. Theron's expression hardened instantly. How many? 4 wolves, experienced trackers, not prone to careless mistakes. Could be Iron Peak. But even as Theron said it, Elara could see he didn't believe it. Or my handlers realized they were being watched. Alara's mind was already racing ahead, seeing patterns and possibilities, and decided to eliminate the surveillance before making their next move. Which would be? Caspian looked between them, clearly trying to piece together a situation he only partially understood. Using me as a weapon. Elara felt cold certainty settle in her gut. I failed to kill the Alpha on my own, so they'll escalate, force the confrontation somehow. How? Theron demanded. I don't know. She pressed her hands against the table, staring at the maps as if they held answers. But it'll be something I can't ignore, something that pushes me to act immediately, emotionally, without thinking through consequences. They'll take hostages. Caspian's voice was grim. Someone you care about. Force you to choose between them and the Alpha. I don't care about anyone here. But even as Elara said it, she knew it was becoming less true by the hour. Despite her intentions, despite her training, she was starting to see the wolves of Thornveil as people rather than obstacles, starting to understand what they'd built here, what they were trying to protect. Then they'll manufacture a situation where you have to. Theron moved to the window, looking out toward the forest. Create a scenario where your only option is to do exactly what they want. Or, Elara heard her own voice, cold and tactical, I go to them first. End this before they can set whatever plan they've made in motion. Alone? Theron turned to face her. You walk into their camp by yourself and demand answers from people who've spent 15 years turning you into a weapon? I'm not asking permission. She straightened, feeling the familiar weight of determination settling onto her shoulders. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. They owe me truth. They owe me 15 years of my life, and I'm going to collect that debt one way or another. Then you don't go alone. Theron's voice carried absolute authority. You take Caspian and a strike team, 6 wolves, enough to handle trouble but small enough to move fast. I work better alone. Not anymore. He crossed to her, and this time he did close the distance, standing near enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. The bond means your survival is tied to mine. You die, I die. So your safety isn't just your concern anymore, it's mine. And I'm not letting you walk into an ambush because you're too stubborn to accept backup. Elara wanted to argue, wanted to assert independence, maintain control, prove she didn't need anyone. But the tactical part of her mind, the part that had kept her alive through years of dangerous training, recognized wisdom when it was offered. Fine, she said. Caspian and 5 others, but they follow my lead. I know these people. I know how they think. Agreed. Theron looked at Caspian. Assemble a team. Best trackers we have. Be ready to move within the hour. Caspian nodded and left, his footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. Thank you, Elara said, the words awkward but genuine, for not trying to stop me. I learned a long time ago that you can't stop someone from walking toward their fate. Theron's expression was unreadable. You can only make sure they don't walk alone. He moved toward the door, then paused. Elara, When you confront them, when they tell you whatever truth or lies they've prepared, remember one thing. What? You get to choose what happens next. His eyes met hers, intense and unwavering. They shaped you, trained you, pointed you at me like a loaded weapon. But the finger on the trigger is yours. The choice of whether to pull it, that's yours too. And no matter what you decide, no matter what happens in that camp, I won't fight back. I won't defend myself. If you decide I need to die for what I did to your pack, I'll accept that judgment. That's suicide. No. A sad smile touched his lips. That's acknowledging debt. Your father died because of my decisions. Your childhood was destroyed. If blood is what's owed, then blood is what I'll give. But I wanted you to know it's a choice. Your choice, not theirs. He left before she could respond, the door closing with a soft click that sounded somehow final. Alara stood alone in the war room, surrounded by maps of coming battles, and tried to understand how her mission had become so impossibly complicated. She'd come here for revenge. Simple, clean, justified revenge. But revenge required a monster, and the man she'd found was anything but simple. She touched the scar on her neck, feeling the steady burn that had become almost familiar. The bond pulsed beneath her fingers, a reminder of magic she hadn't chosen but couldn't escape. Somewhere in the depths of the keep, behind that locked door, the wolf waited. The part of him that wanted to claim her completely, to finish what was started 15 years ago. And in 3 days, an army would arrive at the gates. 200 wolves against 80, with everything depending on whether Thornveil could mount an effective defense while dealing with internal chaos. The pieces were all moving. The game was accelerating towards some conclusion she couldn't quite see, and Alara had to decide quickly which side she was actually on. Because neutrality, she was beginning to understand, was no longer an option. The bond made sure of that. She had 1 hour to prepare, one chance to get answers from the people who'd shaped her entire life, and then she'd have to choose who she was going to be. Weapon or warrior, tool or free agent, the assassin they'd created or the woman she was becoming despite their plans. The hour began now. Outside the window, storm clouds gathered again on the horizon. Another blizzard coming, heavier than the last, the kind of weather that made travel dangerous and battles impossible. But battles, Alara had learned, weren't always fought with blades and blood. Sometimes the most important confrontations happened in quiet camps with the people who claimed to love you while turning you into exactly what they needed you to be. She left the war room and headed for her quarters to arm herself properly. This time, she wouldn't be hiding blades and poison. This time, she was going as herself, fully armed, fully aware, fully ready for whatever truth waited in those foothills. And if that truth demanded blood, well, she'd spent 15 years learning exactly how to spill it. The game had changed, but she was still playing to win. The strike team assembled in the courtyard as the sun climbed toward noon. 6 wolves in addition to Caspian, each chosen for skills that might prove necessary. Alara checked her gear, twin blades now visible at her hips, throwing knives across her chest, wolfsbane powder in accessible pouches. They moved out through the eastern gate, flowing through snow-covered forest with practiced silence. Alara found herself falling into the rhythm of pack movement, despite never having trained with these wolves. Something instinctive bypassed conscious thought and tapped deeper patterns. "You're moving like pack," Caspian said quietly beside her. "That's the bond working, teaching you patterns you never learned." The forest grew denser as they approached the foothills. Signs of habitation appeared, old campsites, territorial markers, lingering wolf scent. One of the trackers signaled halt. In the distance, voices drifted through trees. The team circled to create a perimeter. Through a gap in the trees, Alara saw 4 tents arranged defensively around a cold fire pit. 4 elderly wolves and 1 young guardian stood there, her handlers. Alara stepped from the trees before Caspian could signal. "Hello, Elder Morna. Elder Vex, Kael, Isara, Marcus. Miss me?" Shock rippled across their faces. The young guardian moved to protect the elders, but Morna raised a hand to stop him. "Alara." Her voice was warm, deceptively gentle. "Child, what are you doing here? The mission isn't complete." "Isn't it?" Alara kept her hands loose but ready. The Thornveil wolves emerged behind her, creating a circle. "I found the Thornveil Alpha, got close, just like you wanted. So why does it feel like the mission parameters were incomplete?" "You were to observe, report, assess defenses, nothing more." Elder Vex's voice was measured. Liar. The word cut through. You trained me to kill. 15 years of weapons, tactics, poison. You don't train someone like that just to observe. And why send me back to the one alpha whose mark I already carry? Why wait until the dormant bond would reawaken? Heavy silence fell. You knew, Alara continued coldly. Found me right after Maris sealed my memory. Spent years planning how to use me. When Iron Peak started moving toward Thornveil, you activated your weapon. You were always too clever. Morna's warmth evaporated. We hoped conditioning would override your analytical mind, but we underestimated you. The casual admission struck hard. Why? Because Thornveil has to fall. Morna's voice was matter-of-fact. The Alpha is too strong, too much of a threat. With him gone, Iron Peak claims the land, and we negotiate favorable terms for Blood Moon refugees to settle in the power vacuum. You're working with Iron Peak. We're working with reality. Vex's voice was hard. Blood Moon is scattered, dying in exile. If we help Iron Peak take Thornveil, we earn a place, a home, a future, by sacrificing me. Cold certainty settled deeper, using the bond to kill the Alpha, or weaken him for Iron Peak's assault. You were already dead the moment that wolf marked you. Isara's thin voice was sharp. We just delayed it 15 years, gave you life, training, purpose. Now we're asking you to fulfill the destiny written the night your pack burned. My destiny is my own. Alara's hands moved to blade hilts. And I choose something different. You choose wrong, Marcus, restrain her. The young guardian moved fast and confident. He expected easy victory. He got blood. Alara's blade opened a line across his forearm before he'd completed 3 steps. She flowed past his reaching hands, drove an elbow into his solar plexus, swept his legs. He hit the ground hard, her blade at his throat. Stay down, please, I don't want to kill you. The Thornveil wolves had moved into combat positions, creating a barrier. No weapons drawn, but the threat was overwhelming. You can't win this, child. Morna's voice carried disappointment. Even if you kill us, Iron Peak will attack. The Alpha will fall. When the bond breaks from his death, you'll follow into darkness. Maybe. Alara kept her blade steady. Or maybe I'll fight beside him. Maybe we'll survive without sacrificing either of us to your politics. Naive. The bond will consume you. The moon will reject what you're trying to build. Then I'll die trying, but I'll die making my own choices, not following your script. Foolish girl. You're trading one cage for another. The bond will drain you, reshape you, subsume your identity. You're wrong. Caspian's voice cut through. Bonds aren't prisons. They're partnerships. My mate died free, making choices she believed in. I'd choose that pain 1,000 times over, living safe, and never knowing what connection means. Alara looked at her handlers and saw them clearly for the first time. Not family, just strategists who'd found a useful tool. I'm leaving, going back to Thornveil. When Iron Peak attacks, I'll fight beside the pack you wanted me to destroy, not because the bond compels me, but because I choose to stand with wolves who value life over revenge. Then you're a traitor to your pack, to your father's memory. No, Alara sheathed her blade with finality. I'm just done being your weapon. She turned her back on them and walked toward the trees. Each step felt like breaking invisible chains. When the bond kills you, Morna's voice stopped her at the forest edge. Remember, we offered you a clean death with purpose. You traded it for playing house with a monster. Alara looked back. He's not the monster in this story, Morna. You are. They moved quickly through the forest, putting distance between themselves and the camp. That went well? Caspian observed dryly. They're not done. They've committed too much. They'll find another way. They reached the keep as sun touched the western horizon. Theron stood waiting in the doorway, his eyes scanning Alara for injury. When he saw she was whole, tension drained from his shoulders. They didn't take it well, I'm guessing. They confirmed everything. Admitted working with Iron Peak. Admitted planning to use me to kill you or weaken you for the assault. And now? Now they'll find another way. But whatever they try, they're doing it without me. I'm done being their tool. Relief and hope flickered across his expression. Does that mean you're with us? It means I'm not against you. I won't be the knife in your back. That much I can promise. That's enough. Come on, you need food and rest. What I need is to understand the full tactical situation. If they're feeding intelligence to Iron Peak, every plan we made is potentially compromised. Theron paused, then nodded. War room, 30 minutes. Alara headed for her quarters, Caspian beside her. You did good out there. That took strength most wolves don't have. Or stupidity. They raised me. Walking away should feel liberating, but mostly it feels like I've cut off my own roots. Roots can be transplanted. Takes time to establish in new soil, but it happens. Sometimes the new ground is healthier. Alara cleaned her blades, allowed herself 5 minutes to breathe, then headed for the war room. Self-doubt would have to wait. War was coming. The war room was filling when she arrived. Marcus, Caspian, pack leaders she hadn't met, and Theron standing at the table's head, tracking her movement as she entered. "Show her," he said to Caspian. The beta unrolled a new map marked with fresh intelligence. Alara studied it, her tactical mind immediately seeing the problem. They've moved. Iron Peak was 2 days out this morning. Now they're positioned here, less than a day's march. They know we hit their supply line and that we know they're coming. They're accelerating. Theron's voice was tight. "Tomorrow," Marcus stated the obvious. "They'll be at our gates by dawn." Earlier. Alara pointed to a secondary position. "See this? That's a flanking force. They're surrounding us, cutting off retreat, turning siege into slaughter." Silence greeted her analysis. "Can we hold?" someone asked finally. "No." Theron's honesty was brutal. "Not against those numbers with that strategy. They'll breach the walls in the first assault. Then we evacuate. Get cubs and elders out through northern passages." "To where? Nobody will give us sanctuary. We'll be hunted refugees." Alara stared at the map, rejecting each possibility. Traditional defense wouldn't work. Evacuation was suicide. Fighting was futile. They needed something unconventional. "What if we don't defend?" she heard herself say. All eyes turned to her. "Iron Peak expects resistance, expects us to hold walls. That's standard doctrine." Alara traced roots. "But what if we're not here? What if the keep is empty when they arrive?" "Let them take territory without a fight," Marcus said thoughtfully. "Not abandonment, trap." Alara's mind engaged fully. "We evacuate everything that matters through northern routes before they close the circle. Leave the keep empty. When they flood in expecting battle and finding nothing, we hit them from behind, caught between our forces and the walls they thought they'd captured." Caspian leaned forward. "Turn their strategy against them. They plan to surround us. We surround them." "We'd need time to evacuate, position forces, coordinate." Theron was calculating. "We have tonight. One night to move everyone who can't fight, stage supplies, prepare for the largest tactical reversal in Thornveil's history." "It's insane. It's our only chance." The moment stretched between them across the table. "Do it," Theron said finally. "Caspian, organize evacuation. Marcus, position every fighter by dawn. We have 8 hours to empty this keep and turn it into a weapon." The room exploded into activity. Within minutes, only Theron and Alara remained. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for staying, for fighting, for choosing us." "Don't thank me yet. This plan has a dozen ways to fail catastrophically. Then we die fighting together instead of apart. That counts for something." The bond pulsed between them, warm and steady. Alara realized she was becoming accustomed to the sense of him always present at the edge of awareness. Except when he looked at her like now, with an intensity that made the bond flare bright and impossible to ignore. "After this is over," he said, "after we survive or die trying, we need to decide about the bond." "I know." He moved around the table, closing distance until she could feel his warmth, smell pine and smoke and wild places. "Whatever you choose, I'll honor it. Complete the bond, break it, or leave. If you want freedom and it kills me, then I die giving you that choice." "That would kill you. The separation would trigger complete bond failure." "Then I die giving you freedom." His hand brushed hair from her face. The contact sent electricity down her spine. "You deserve the choice." "So do you," she whispered. "I made my choice 15 years ago when I pulled you from those flames. I chose you then. I'm choosing you now. The only question is what you choose." The moment stretched, heavy with possibility. Alara felt the bond pulling, her heart beating faster, her body responding to proximity and chemistry, and the fact that she was tired of fighting alone. Before she could speak, a howl split the night, long, urgent, unmistakable. Enemy sighted, coming fast, all wolves to stations. The moment shattered. Theron's expression hardened instantly. "They're early, attacking tonight." Alara followed, hands finding weapons automatically. The evacuation? Not complete, maybe half the civilians clear before they reach the walls. They burst into chaos. Wolves racing to positions with practiced efficiency. On battlements, archers knocked arrows. At gates, heavy beams dropped into reinforcing brackets. Beyond the walls, visible in torchlight and moon, a sea of wolves flowed toward Thornveil, more than 200, maybe 300. "To the walls!" Theron's voice commanded absolute attention. "Archers fire at will. Gates hold until my command. Buy time for civilians to escape." Alara climbed stairs to battlements, Caspian appearing with a bow. "You know how to use this?" "I can learn fast." The first wave hit the gates like thunder, bodies slamming wood, claws tearing iron, howls of bloodlust. The gates held barely, splinters flew, metal groaned. "Loose!" Dozens of arrows flew, finding targets. Wolves fell, but more surged forward. The wave was endless. Alara drew and fired, trusting instinct. Her first arrow missed, the second struck a shoulder. By the third, she was finding rhythm. Beside her, Theron fought with bow and blade, directing defense while personally holding a critical section. This was the warrior who'd built Thornveil into a stronghold that refused to fall. But even warriors could be overwhelmed by numbers. The gates exploded inward. The first wave of Iron Peak wolves poured through, and the battle descended into chaos. Alara had fought in training simulations hundreds of times, sparred with instructors who pulled no punches, faced wolves who wanted to prove she didn't belong. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for the reality of true battle. The courtyard became a killing ground in seconds. Iron Peak wolves poured through the shattered gates like water through a broken dam, and Thornveil warriors met them with desperate ferocity. Steel rang against claw. Blood sprayed across ancient stone. Screams of rage and agony merged into a single endless howl that seemed to come from the earth itself. Alara emptied her quiver in the first 3 minutes, every arrow finding flesh, before dropping the bow and drawing her twin blades. A massive gray wolf surged up the stairs toward her position, eyes blazing with bloodlust. She met it halfway, sliding under its lunge, blades opening twin lines across its exposed belly. It crashed past her, momentum carrying it over the edge of the battlements. Another came, then another. They kept coming. Beside her, Caspian fought with the brutal efficiency of a wolf who'd survived too many battles to waste energy on style. Block, counter, kill. Block, counter, kill. The rhythm was hypnotic and horrifying. Every movement served a purpose. Every strike ended a threat. "Fall back!" Theron's voice cut through the chaos. "Controlled retreat to the inner courtyard. Leave them nothing but stone." The Thornveil wolves began withdrawing in coordinated groups, each one covering the others. It looked like panic to the enemy. It was anything but. They were executing the plan, drawing Iron Peak deeper into the trap, even as the cost climbed higher with every second. Alara moved with them, her tactical mind cataloging everything. 50 Iron Peak wolves in the outer courtyard now, another wave pressing through the gates. Thornveil casualties mounting but still organized, still fighting, still buying time for civilians to escape through the northern passages. She reached the inner courtyard as the last of the defensive line collapsed inward. Heavy doors slammed shut behind them, buying precious seconds. Around her, wolves gasped for breath, checked wounds, prepared for the next assault. "Status!" Theron barked, blood streaming from a gash across his shoulder that he seemed not to notice. "North evacuation 80% complete," Marcus reported, his voice steady despite the arrow protruding from his thigh. "Another 10 minutes and they're clear." "We don't have 10 minutes." Caspian pointed to the doors, already shuddering under the weight of bodies slamming against them from the other side. "Those won't hold more than 2. Theron's eyes found Alara across the courtyard. Through the bond, she felt his calculation, his acceptance, his grim determination. He was preparing to make a last stand, buy those 10 minutes with his life if necessary. "No." The word came out before she'd consciously decided to speak. Alara pushed through the gathered wolves to stand in front of Theron. "You're not dying here, not like this. We're out of options." His voice was gentle, almost apologetic. "The plan failed. They moved too fast. Now we do what warriors do. We hold the line so others can live." "The plan didn't fail." Alara's mind was racing, seeing patterns and possibilities through the fog of adrenaline. "It's just not finished yet. You wanted them inside the keep. They're inside. You wanted them overconfident. They're breaking down doors thinking they've won. Now we complete it." "How?" Marcus demanded. "We're trapped in here with them. No way to circle behind. No element of surprise." "Yes, there is." Alara turned to Caspian. "The cellar. The passages underneath the keep. You said there are northern routes for evacuation. That means there are tunnels connecting the different sections. Understanding dawned in Caspian's eyes. We can move through the sublevels, come up behind them while they're focused on these doors. But the cellar? Theron's expression was conflicted. The sealed door, the wolf. Is it sealed from both sides? Alara asked. What? The door, the wards. Are they designed to keep something from escaping into the keep, or to prevent access from both directions? Theron exchanged glances with Caspian. Just one way, to keep the wolf contained during full moons, but then we can get past it. Alara was already moving toward the stairs that led down. We go through the tunnels, come up in the outer courtyard behind their main force, catch them between us and these doors when they finally break through. That's insane, someone muttered. That's brilliant, Caspian corrected, and our only shot. The doors shuddered again, wood beginning to splinter. Do it. Theron gestured to a group of 20 wolves. You're with me and Alara. Everyone else, hold these doors until you hear our signal, then hit them from the front while we take them from behind. The selected wolves followed as Theron led the way down narrow stairs into darkness. Alara stayed close behind him, feeling the bond pulse stronger with proximity. The air grew colder, heavier, thick with old magic and the particular smell of deep earth. They reached the cellar level, and Alara saw it. The door marked with wolfsbane, exactly as described. Purple flowers hung in dried bundles, their presence making her skin prickle with instinctive warning. Beyond it, she could feel something. Not hear, not see, feel. A presence that recognized her through the bond, that waited with predatory patience. We have to go past it, Theron said quietly, gesturing to a passage that ran alongside the sealed chamber. The connecting tunnels are beyond. Just don't touch the door, don't speak to it, and whatever you do, don't listen if it speaks to you. They moved in single file, weapons ready, every wolf hyper-alert to the wrongness radiating from that sealed space. Alara felt the bond stretching as she passed, felt the pull intensify until it was almost physical. The voice came, just as Caspian had warned it would. Alara. The word was rough velvet wrapped in smoke. So close now. Let me see you. Let me show you what we could be. She kept walking, jaw clenched, refusing to acknowledge the call. Please, the voice cracked with longing and desperation. I've waited so long. Just open the door. Just let me touch you one more time. Her hand moved toward the handle before she realized what she was doing. Theron's hand caught her wrist, stopping her. It's not him, he whispered. That's the wolf, the part that doesn't understand anything except need and hunger and the drive to claim. Don't listen. Won't. Alara nodded, pulling her hand back, and kept moving. The voice followed them down the passage, calling, pleading, promising things that sounded like salvation but tasted like poison. Only when they'd turned 2 corners and the distance had stretched did the pull finally ease. That was close, Caspian muttered. Closer than I've ever seen someone get without actually opening it. The bond is stronger than we thought, Theron said, his expression grim. After this is over, we're dealing with it. One way or another. We can't keep living with that thing clawing at both of us. They reached a junction where 3 tunnels met. Theron studied them, then pointed to the middle passage. This one comes up in the armory, which opens to the outer courtyard. If we're lucky, they'll be so focused on the inner doors they won't notice us until it's too late. And if we're not lucky, someone asked, then we die fighting. Theron's honesty was brutal, but appreciated. But we take as many of them with us as possible. They moved through the tunnel, weapons ready, breathing controlled. Above them, faintly, came the sounds of battle continuing. Thornveil wolves holding the inner doors, Iron Peak forces throwing themselves against the barrier, and somewhere beyond all of it, the rest of Thornveil's people fleeing north to safety. The tunnel began to slope upward. Theron held up a hand, signaling halt. He crept forward alone, checking something Alara couldn't see from her position. After a moment, he returned. Armory door is clear. They haven't thought to guard it. We go out fast and quiet, form up in the shadows behind the supply wagons they brought through the gates. When I give the signal, we hit them with everything we have. Nods all around. These were warriors who understood that the next few minutes would determine whether Thornveil survived or fell. They climbed the last section of tunnel and emerged into the armory. Weapon racks lined the walls, most emptied for the battle. A single window showed the outer courtyard beyond, and through it, Alara could see the chaos of Iron Peak's assault. at least 100 wolves between them and the inner doors, all focused forward, none watching their rear. Perfect. Theron led them out, moving like shadows, using the supply wagons and scattered equipment for cover. 20 wolves positioned themselves in a loose arc behind the enemy force, waiting, ready. Alara found herself next to Theron, both of them crouched behind a wagon loaded with what looked like battering ram equipment. Through the bond, she felt his focus narrowing, his breathing steadying, his entire being preparing for violence. "After this," he said quietly, not looking at her, "after we survive or die, I need you to know something." "Theron, let me finish." His voice was urgent but controlled. "That thing in the cellar, the wolf that calls to you, it's not me. It's the worst parts of me. The hunger without wisdom, the need without restraint, the instinct without conscience. And I'm terrified that if we complete the bond, if we let it fully form, you'll end up bound to that instead of to the man trying his best to be worthy of you." Alara studied his profile in the dim light. "And what if I told you I see both? The man and the wolf, the wisdom and the hunger, and I'm not afraid of either one." He finally looked at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache. "You should be." "Maybe." She checked her blades one final time. "But I stopped doing what I should a while ago. Now I just do what I choose, and I choose to stand here beside you, whatever that means." The bond flared between them, warm and bright and certain. For just a moment, in the space between heartbeats, Alara felt something shift. Not completion, not yet, but movement toward it, acceptance beginning to form where resistance had been. Then Theron was standing, giving the signal, and there was no more time for words. 20 Thornveil wolves erupted from cover and slammed into the rear of Iron Peak's forces like a hammer strike. The element of surprise was devastating. Wolves fell before they knew they were under attack. The formation collapsed inward, confusion spreading like wildfire. Alara's blades found throats and bellies and the soft spots between ribs. She moved through the chaos like water, flowing around attacks, redirecting momentum, using every trick her handlers had taught her. But this time, she fought for something beyond revenge. She fought for pack, for home, for the people trying to escape to safety while she bought them time. The inner doors burst open. Thornveil wolves poured out, fresh and organized, hitting Iron Peak's front while Theron's group held their rear. Suddenly the hunters were caught in a vice, squeezed between two forces that knew the terrain and fought with the desperation of people defending their home. The tide began to turn. Alara found herself fighting beside Caspian, their movements synchronizing without conscious coordination. He'd sweep low, she'd strike high. She'd bind an attacker, he'd finish them. The bond was working again, not with her mate but with pack, teaching her patterns and rhythms that made her part of something larger than herself. A massive wolf, larger than any she'd seen, came charging through the melee. His fur was iron gray, his eyes cold and calculating. Around his neck, a silver chain that marked him as Alpha. Voran Steelhide, leader of Iron Peak, the wolf who'd orchestrated this entire assault. He saw Theron across the courtyard and altered course, driving toward him with single-minded purpose. Alpha targeting Alpha. If he could kill Theron, the battle was over regardless of tactical position. "Theron!" Alara's warning came out as a scream. He turned just as Voran launched himself forward, claws extended, jaws wide. They collided with devastating force, rolling across blood-slicked stone in a tangle of fangs and fury. Theron's blade flashed, opening a line across Voran's shoulder. Voran's claws tore through Theron's side, drawing blood that steamed in the cold air. They separated, circled, attacked again. This wasn't the tactical fighting Alara had witnessed before. This was pure animal violence, two alphas trying to kill each other with single-minded focus. Alara tried to reach them, but Iron Peak wolves blocked her path. 3 of them, working in concert, drove her back toward the wall. She fought desperately, but they were experienced pack fighters who knew how to coordinate attacks. One blade went skittering across the stones. The second she managed to keep, but it wasn't enough against 3 opponents. Through the bond, she felt Theron's pain as Voran's jaws locked on his forearm. Felt his rage as he drove his blade up under Voran's ribs, not deep enough to kill, but enough to make the enemy Alpha release his grip. Felt his exhaustion as blood loss began to take its toll. He was losing. The 3 wolves pressed their advantage, and Alara's back hit the wall. No more room to retreat. No more clever tricks. Just her, one blade, and 3 enemies who'd already tasted victory. The bond pulsed. Not warmth this time. Heat. Burning heat that spread from her scar through her chest and down her limbs. Power she didn't understand and couldn't control, rising in response to her need and Theron's danger. The mark on her neck flared bright enough to cast light. The 3 wolves hesitated, confused by the phenomenon. In that hesitation, Elara struck. She moved faster than she should have been able to, stronger than her frame suggested possible. The blade in her hand seemed to guide itself, finding the perfect angles, the critical strikes. 2 wolves fell in as many seconds. The 3rd tried to flee, but she was on him before he'd taken 3 steps, blade opening his throat from behind. Across the courtyard, Vorin had Theron pinned, jaws closing toward his throat, victory seconds away. Elara ran. The bond burned hotter with every step, feeding her strength she shouldn't have, speed that defied physics. She covered 30 feet in heartbeats and hit Vorin like a thrown spear, blade driving between his ribs from the side. The Iron Peak Alpha roared, releasing Theron, rounding on this new threat. But Elara was already moving, using his momentum against him, letting his own attack carry him past her while her blade opened another line across his flank. Vorin staggered, blood pouring from multiple wounds. He looked between Theron and Elara, seeing for the first time that they weren't fighting as individuals. They were fighting as a unit, connected by something deeper than tactics. "Luna," he spat, the word carrying recognition and contempt. "You're bond-marked. That's not possible. You're too young for a completed bond." "Surprise," Elara said, circling to put herself between the wounded Alpha and Vorin. "Some bonds don't follow your rules." Vorin's eyes narrowed, calculating. The battle around them had shifted decisively. Thornveil was winning, Iron Peak forces breaking and retreating toward the shattered gates. But if he could kill these 2, could break the bond publicly, the victory might still be salvaged. He gathered himself for one final assault, muscles bunching, claws extending. This would be all or nothing. But before he could move, a howl cut through the chaos, different from the battle sounds. This one carried authority and power and ancient magic. Every wolf in the courtyard froze, instinct overriding conscious thought. From the keep's main entrance, Maris appeared. The old healer walked slowly, staff in hand, her eyes glowing with the pale light of channeled magic. Behind her came a figure Elara recognized with shock. Morna, the elder who'd raised her. But Morna wasn't commanding or confident now. She was bound with silver chains, being dragged forward by 2 Thornveil wolves. "Enough!" Maris's voice was old as mountains and twice as immovable. "This battle was built on lies. Time for truth." She gestured with her staff, and light exploded from its tip, washing over the courtyard. When it faded, everyone could see what had been invisible before. Magical threads, thin as spider silk, connecting Morna to nearly a dozen Iron Peak wolves, controlling them, guiding them. "She's been manipulating both sides," Maris announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the courtyard. "Feeding intelligence to Iron Peak while sending Elara here as a weapon against Theron. Also, Blood Moon exiles could claim both territories in the chaos." Vorin's expression shifted from determination to fury. "You told us he was weak, distracted, easy prey." "He was supposed to be," Morna said, not even attempting to deny it now. But the girl chose wrong. Chose him over her duty, ruined everything. The Iron Peak Alpha turned to Maris. "Break the control. If I've been fighting someone else's war, I withdraw. This ends now." Maris nodded and spoke words in a language older than any pack. The threads connecting Morna to the Iron Peak wolves snapped, dissipating like smoke. Around the courtyard, wolves shook their heads as if waking from dreams, confusion replacing battle lust. Vorin looked at Theron, both alphas bloodied and exhausted. "You knew?" "Suspected. Couldn't prove it until Maris found the spell work." Theron kept his blade ready, but lowered. "This doesn't have to continue. You were manipulated. Your wolves were controlled. There's no honor in finishing what she started. My wolves still died. So did mine." Theron's voice was level. "Question is whether we compound the tragedy or find another way." Vorin was silent for a long moment, the weight of alpha responsibility visible in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. "Withdrawal. We take our dead and leave your territory. But if you ever cross into Iron Peak lands, I won't. You have my word." It wasn't peace. It wasn't friendship. But it was survival, which was more than anyone had expected an hour ago. Iron Peak forces began gathering their wounded and fallen, moving toward the shattered gates with the wary alertness of wolves who knew they'd come close to disaster. Voren was the last to leave, pausing at the threshold to look back at Alara. "You fight well, Luna. If you'd been born to my pack, I'd have made you my daughter." The words carried respect, despite their earlier enmity. "If I'd been born to your pack," Alara replied, "you'd have taught me to attack first and question later. I prefer the questioning." Voren's laugh was rough but genuine. Then he was gone, and the courtyard fell into exhausted silence. Maris approached Morna, her expression sad rather than angry. "You twisted a child, shaped her into a weapon, used her grief and confusion as tools. What do you have to say for yourself?" "That I did what was necessary." Morna's voice held no regret. "Blood Moon deserves to rise again. I'd sacrifice 1,000 children if it meant our people had a home." "Then you understand why I'm sending you into exile. Alone. No pack will shelter you. No territory will claim you. You'll wander until the moon calls you home, and you'll die knowing you destroyed the very thing you tried to save." The old healer gestured, and the bonds holding Morna transformed from silver to shadow. The exiled elder staggered, feeling the weight of true isolation settle onto her shoulders. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the gates, her form already beginning to fade into the gray spaces between packs. Alara watched her go and felt nothing. No anger, no grief, just the quiet satisfaction of a story reaching its proper conclusion. "You're bleeding," Theron said beside her, and she realized he was right. Multiple wounds across her arms and torso, none fatal, but all contributing to the lightheadedness beginning to creep in around the edges of her vision. "So are you," she pointed out. His side was torn open, blood still flowing despite his attempts to staunch it. "Come on." Caspian appeared, looking exhausted but whole. "Both of you to the healing ward. That's an order from your beta." They limped together through the keep, passing wolves who nodded respect or reached out to touch their shoulders in wordless acknowledgement. The battle was won, the pack had survived, and somehow, impossibly, they'd done it without destroying each other in the process. The healing ward was chaos. Wounded everywhere, healers moving between them with practiced efficiency, the smell of blood and herbs thick in the air. Maris found them immediately, directing them to beds side by side. "The bond," she said without preamble, examining first Alara's wounds and then Theron's. "It's not stable. What you did out there, channeling power through an incomplete connection, you've stressed it past safe limits. We have perhaps a day before it either completes or kills you both trying." "What do we need to do?" Alara asked, exhaustion making her words slur slightly. "Choose." Maris's eyes were ancient and knowing. "Consciously, deliberately, completely. No more half measures, no more waiting for the perfect moment. Either you commit to the bond with full knowledge of what you're accepting, or we sever it permanently before it tears you both apart. And if we try to complete it," Theron's voice was rough, "what happens if the moon still rejects it? Then you die." Maris didn't soften the truth. "But I've been watching you both, studying the bond's behavior, and I think the moon already accepted you, not 15 years ago when you were child and desperate alpha, but today, when you fought as one, when you chose each other over survival, when you proved the bond was built on partnership instead of possession." She touched Alara's mark, then Theron's, and both glowed with soft silver light. "See? The moon's blessing, already present, already waiting. You just have to acknowledge it." "How?" Alara asked. "The old way, under moonlight, with truth between you, speaking the words that make choice into commitment." Maris smiled, and for a moment she looked younger. "But first, sleep. You've both earned rest. The moon will still be there tomorrow." She moved away to tend other wounded, leaving them alone in their adjacent beds. Around them, the sounds of the healing ward continued. Wolves groaning in pain, healers murmuring comfort, the occasional cry of grief as someone learned a friend hadn't survived. "We did it," Theron said quietly. "Your plan worked." "Our plan," Alara corrected. "I just suggested it. You had the courage to try it." Courage or desperation. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. They lay in silence for a while, neither sleeping but both too exhausted to move. The bond pulsed between them, steady and warm now that they were close, the stress of battle fading into simple presence. "I'm scared." Alara admitted finally, of completing the bond, of what it means, of losing myself in the connection. Me too. Theron's honesty was comforting. I've been alone so long. The thought of letting someone that close, of being that vulnerable, it terrifies me. But I'm more scared of losing you, of watching the bond kill you because I was too afraid to take the risk. He turned his head to look at her. I nearly lost you today, multiple times, and every time I felt it through the bond, felt your pain and fear, I realized something. What? That I don't want to live in a world where you're not in it. Whether that makes me selfish or romantic or just desperate, I don't know, but it's truth. But Alara reached across the space between their beds, her hand finding his. Their fingers intertwined, and the bond sang with approval. Tomorrow, she said, under the moon, we'll speak the words. You're sure? No. Her laugh was soft. But I'm choosing it anyway. That's what you taught me. That choosing something despite fear is braver than waiting until you're certain. They fell asleep like that, hands linked across the gap, the bond settling into something that felt less like a trap and more like a promise. When Alara woke, it was to find sunlight streaming through the ward's windows and Theron's bed empty. Panic flared before she felt him through the bond, moving somewhere else in the keep, but safe and whole. She rose carefully, testing her wounds. Maris had done good work. Everything hurt, but nothing was incapacitating. Her clothes had been changed while she slept, the blood-stained battle gear replaced with simple, clean cloth. Following the bond like a compass, she made her way through the keep. Wolves nodded as she passed, and she realized the news had spread. The Luna who'd fought beside their alpha, the outsider who'd chosen them, the weapon who'd become a warrior. She found Theron on the battlements, looking out over the courtyard where work crews were already repairing the shattered gates. He turned as she approached, and the smile that crossed his face was unguarded and genuine. You're up. How do you feel? Like I got thrown into a meat grinder and came out the other side. She joined him at the wall. But alive. We're both alive. Thanks to you. He gestured to the courtyard below. 43 dead, another 60 wounded. But 300 civilians made it out safely. Without your plan, everyone would have died. Without our pack fighting for each other, the plan wouldn't have mattered. Alara studied the workers below. What happens now? Now we rebuild. Repair the gates, tend the wounded, mourn the fallen, send word to the evacuees that it's safe to return. He was quiet for a moment. And tonight, under the full moon, we complete what we started 15 years ago. Full moon? Alara's stomach clenched. But the cellar, the wolf, you said— I know what I said. Theron's expression was calm. But Maris thinks the completion will integrate what's sealed below. The wolf isn't separate from me. It's just the parts I've been too afraid to acknowledge. When we complete the bond properly, when I accept all of what I am instead of trying to lock away the dangerous pieces, it won't need to be contained anymore. And if she's wrong, then you'll be there to stop me. That's what partners do. He took her hand. I trust you, Alara. More than I've trusted anyone in decades. If the wolf takes over, if I become the monster everyone fears, you have permission to end it, quick and clean. I'm not killing you. Then help me survive myself. His grip tightened. Be the anchor that keeps me human even when the wolf rises. Be the voice that calls me back when instinct tries to overwhelm reason. Be my mate in all the ways that matter. Alara pulled him closer, rising on her toes until her forehead rested against his. The bond flared bright, responding to proximity and emotion and the decision forming between them. Tonight, she whispered, under the moon, I'll speak the words. We'll speak them together. He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. As equals, as partners, as two people choosing each other despite every reason to run. They spent the day preparing. Maris instructed them on the ritual, teaching them the ancient words that would bind them properly. Caspian brought ceremonial clothes, traditional garments worn by mates during completion ceremonies. The pack gathered in the Great Hall, understanding that something significant was happening, even if they didn't know the details. As the sun began to set, Alara felt nervousness mixing with anticipation. This was it, the moment where she either committed completely or walked away forever. No more half measures, no more waiting. Theron found her in her quarters as the last light faded. He wore simple black, his wounds hidden beneath fabric, his expression both anxious and determined. Ready? He asked. "No," she admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." They walked together to the courtyard, where Maris waited beside a cleared circle. The full moon was rising, huge and silver, casting everything in ethereal light. Around the edges of the space, wolves gathered to witness, not intrusive, but present. Pack acknowledging the formation of a new mated pair. Maris gestured them into the circle. "Face each other, take hands." They obeyed, and Alara felt the bond intensify immediately, responding to the ceremony's beginning. "The moon sees you," Maris intoned. "The pack witnesses you. Now speak truth between you. Why do you choose this bond?" Theron spoke first, his voice steady despite his obvious emotion. "I choose you because you see all of me, the leader and the monster, the wisdom and the rage, and you don't flinch from either. I choose you because you make me want to be worthy of your strength. I choose you because in 15 years of darkness, you're the first light I've found worth following." Alara's throat was tight, but she forced the words out. "I choose you because you gave me freedom, even when it would cost you everything. I choose you because you taught me that choosing my own path is braver than following someone else's plan. I choose you because when I stand beside you, I'm not a weapon or a tool or a broken thing to be fixed. I'm just me, and that's enough." "Then speak the words of binding," Maris commanded. Together, they recited the ancient phrase she'd taught them. Words in a language older than any pack, syllables that tasted like moonlight and magic, and promises that couldn't be broken once spoken. The bond exploded between them. Not pain this time, pure power, flowing both directions, merging and mixing until Alara couldn't tell where she ended, and Theron began. She felt his love, his fear, his desperate hope that this would work. Felt his acceptance of the wolf below, the part of himself he'd spent decades trying to contain. And in response, she opened herself completely. Let him feel her determination, her choice, her decision to stand beside him regardless of cost. The marks on their necks blazed white-hot. Silver light poured from them, visible to everyone watching. The moon above seemed to pulse in response, and for just a moment, Alara felt something vast and ancient acknowledge them, accept them, bless them. The light faded, the pain eased, and when Alara opened her eyes, the bond was complete. Stable, steady, permanent. Theron pulled her close, and she went willingly, feeling the rightness of it. His arms around her, her head against his chest, two hearts beating in perfect synchronization. "It worked," he whispered, wonder in his voice. "We're bonded, truly bonded." Below them, from the depths of the keep, came a sound. Not the desperate howling she'd heard before. This was different, acknowledging, accepting. The wolf had been integrated into the whole, no longer separate or sealed. The pack erupted in howls of celebration. Mate bonds were precious, hard-won, cause for joy. And this one had been fought for, bled for, chosen despite impossible odds. Caspian appeared with ceremonial wine. "To the Alpha and Luna of Thornveil, may your bond strengthen the pack and your leadership guide us through whatever comes next." They drank, and the wine tasted like victory and home and the future they'd earned. The celebration continued late into the night. Wolves sharing stories, drinking, laughing with the relief of people who'd survived catastrophe. Alara found herself in the center of it, no longer an outsider but pack. Luna, chosen and accepted. Much later, when the gathering had dispersed and quiet had returned to the keep, Theron led her to their quarters. Not the small room she'd been given as a servant. His chambers, larger and warmer, with windows that showed the forest beyond. "This is strange," Alara admitted, standing in the center of a space that would now be hers as much as his. "Good strange or bad strange? Just strange. 3 days ago I came here to kill you. Now I'm your mate. That's a significant career change." His laugh was warm. "You were always terrible at being an assassin. Too much conscience." "Maybe." She moved to the window, looking out at moonlight on snow. "Or maybe I just needed to find something worth not killing for." He came up behind her, arms sliding around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. The bond pulsed warm and content between them, no longer fighting or straining, but simply present. "I love you," he said quietly. "I should have said it during the ceremony, but I was too nervous to add anything beyond the ritual words. But I do. Love you, choose you, want to build a life with you." Alara leaned back against him, feeling safe and settled in a way she'd never experienced. "I love you too. even though you're a dramatic alpha with control issues and a disturbing tendency to nearly die in battle. I'll work on that. Please do. I'd like to keep you alive for the foreseeable future. They stood like that for a long time, watching the moon track across the sky, feeling the bond settle deeper into permanence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, rebuilding the keep, negotiating treaties with neighboring packs, figuring out how to lead together instead of separately. But tonight was theirs, hard-won and thoroughly earned. Elara turned in his arms, rising to kiss him properly for the first time without fear or hesitation. His response was immediate and fierce, hands tangling in her hair, pulling her closer, the bond singing with approval and desire and absolute certainty. This was right. This was home. This was the future she'd chosen. And as the moon watched through the windows, blessing the newly bonded pair, Elara finally understood what all the fighting had been for. Not revenge, not duty, not the destiny someone else had written, but this. Partnership. Belonging. Love that had been earned through fire and blood and the courage to choose each other despite every reason not to. The bond burned steady and true between them, no longer a curse or a trap or a weapon, just a promise, spoken under moonlight, witnessed by pack and accepted by the ancient powers that governed all wolves. Forever. But forever began with morning's practical matters. Elara woke to find Theron at the window watching sunrise over the forest. Through the bond, she felt his contentment mixed with responsibility's weight settling onto his shoulders. "You're thinking too loud," she murmured. "I can feel your brain working." He turned, smiling. "Sorry, there's much to organize. Gate repairs, families of the fallen, messengers to Iron Peak, all of which can wait until after breakfast." She crossed to him, sliding arms around his waist. "Pack law says you get at least 1 day after bonding before resuming alpha duties." They dressed together, and Elara found herself fascinated by the domesticity, learning which side of bed he preferred, discovering his meticulous weapon maintenance habits, watching him braid his hair with practiced efficiency. "Here." He took over her tangles, fingers gentle but skilled. "The bond makes small things feel significant at first. Give it a week and this will feel normal." "Will I always feel your emotions?" "It settles, becomes background music instead of constant noise. You'll learn to tune it out unless something significant happens." He finished her braid. "But the awareness never fully goes away." They made their way to the great hall, where breakfast was being served to wolves recovering from yesterday's battle. The room fell silent when they entered, then erupted in cheers. Elara felt heat rise to her cheeks. Caspian appeared, grinning. "The pack is pleased. Bonded alphas lead stronger, and the story of how you two fought is already becoming legend." After breakfast, they convened council. Marcus, Caspian, and senior wolves gathered to discuss priorities. "Gate repairs first," Marcus said. "We'll trade border patrol support to western settlements for materials and craftsmen." "Done. Send messengers today." Theron made notes. "Casualties? 43 dead, 62 wounded, 11 too injured for active duty." "I can help with that," Elara said. All eyes turned to her. "Create positions using their experience without requiring combat. Strategic advisors, combat instructors, intelligence analysts." Theron nodded slowly. "An intelligence division. Not traditional, but nothing about the last 3 days has been traditional." "I'll work with the wounded," Elara said. "See who has aptitude." When council dispersed, Maris appeared. "Luna, I'd like to examine the bond." In a quiet room, Maris placed hands on Elara's neck, magic flowing cool and searching. After a moment, she stepped back satisfied. "Perfect. The bond is stable, balanced, properly integrated." She paused. "You know what that means? Bonded mates synchronize lifespans. Your strengths complement his weaknesses, and if one dies, the other feels it like having their soul torn in half. But we also become better together than apart." "Exactly. But remember, child, a bond this strong requires maintenance. Talk honestly even when difficult. Don't let resentments build." Elara found Theron mediating a property dispute in the courtyard. When finished, they climbed to the battlements, looking over the forest. "Maris says we're perfectly bonded." "Good. I worried we'd rushed it." The moon knew we'd been choosing each other for days. The ritual just acknowledged what had already begun. "I have something for you." He pulled out a simple silver ring engraved with Thornveil's split wolf sigil. Human tradition, but some packs adopted it, a physical symbol. She took the ring, slipping it on. It fit perfectly. Inside, an inscription in the old language, "I choose." Past, present, future. Theron said quietly. "I chose you. I choose you. I will choose you. Every day, for as long as we live." Alara pulled him close, kissing him with gratitude and love and certainty. The bond flared bright between them. Caspian's voice drifted up. "If you two are done being adorable, we have a situation. Messengers from 3 neighboring packs wanting to negotiate alliances." Theron and Alara exchanged glances. This was unexpected. "Tell them we'll meet this afternoon," Theron decided. "Formal reception." They spent the afternoon preparing. When messengers arrived, Alara stood beside Theron on the dais, presenting United Front. The first pack offered alliance in exchange for training support. Theron agreed, with stipulation that training would be reciprocal. The second offered trade agreements and intelligence sharing. Perfect complement to Thornveil's capabilities. The third represented smaller packs wanting protection, offering resources and loyalty. Alara leaned close. "It's responsibility, but also forward warning of threats. And loyal smaller packs create buffer between us and enemies." Theron addressed the messengers. "We'll consider your proposal. Return in 3 days for our answer." "That went better than expected," Caspian said after. "If those alliances solidify, Thornveil's position transforms completely." "Which means we must be careful," Theron warned. "Power attracts enemies. We strengthen too quickly, someone will see us as threat." "Then we strengthen smart," Alara said. "Build genuine partnerships instead of dominance hierarchies." Spoken like a true Luna. Caspian's approval was evident. Evening was spent discussing proposals in detail. By the time they returned to their quarters, both were exhausted. "Is it always this much?" Alara collapsed onto the bed. "Usually more." Theron sat beside her. "Today was relatively calm. Wait until we have crisis requiring immediate response or dispute threatening to split the pack or challenge to alpha authority." "Challenges? Any wolf who thinks they could lead better has right to formal challenge. Single combat, winner takes alpha position." He lay back. "I've faced 3 in 15 years, won all, obviously. And now that you're bonded? Now they'd challenge both of us. Defeat me, and they'd have to defeat you too. It's actually safer. Bonded alphas are harder to depose." "I'm glad I chose this," she said finally. "Even knowing how complicated it is, even knowing there will be challenges and threats and impossible moments, I'm glad I chose you and this pack and this life." Theron pulled her close. "I'm glad you chose us too, more than I can express." They lay together in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Through the bond, contentment mixed until emotions were indistinguishable. This was home. This was belonging. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. The bond pulsed steady and strong, no longer burden or trap, but foundation of everything they were building together. Outside, the moon rose full and bright, blessing the keep and pack and newly bonded pair who would lead them forward. And in the depths of the keep, in the cellar that no longer held a monster, silence reigned. The wolf had been integrated, accepted, made whole. Just like the woman who'd come seeking revenge and found redemption instead. Forever, she'd promised under moonlight. Forever, she'd meant.